I want to show you something. Oh, it's nothing important really, it's just arguably one of the most recognizable places in the history of gaming, Lumbridge. But trust me, what makes it so iconic is not what it has to offer. A building count in the single digits whose only anvil is so rusted it can only be used to make bronze items is not impressing anyone. But of course, this quaint little town is not relegated to the Gaming Culture Hall of Fame because of its importance within the game, but because everyone who played RuneScape as a kid or teenager began their adventure right here. Meaning whether you're someone who played it for 30 minutes before deciding it wasn't for you, or someone who ruined their entire life staring at its incrementing numbers, or anything in between, you're familiar with Lumbridge. I've been covering the lore of old school RuneScape for over a year now, and on this channel you can get the equivalent of a level 3 certificate in Raids lore, God War study, or human history, and yet you can't get even a level 1 certificate in general Gielinor history. This video is my answer to that, and its goal is to go over pretty much every aspect of the lore and story of OSRS I can think of, without going into the kind of exhaustive details as my other videos. I have a funny feeling this script is going to be long enough as it is. I thought it fitting to begin the story of Gielinor right here, at ground zero of a player's own story. The year is 169 of the 5th Age, and by historical standards it's a really good time to be born a human on Gielinor. Every fantasy world with self-respect needs a snappy names for its ages, and so Gielinor's 5th age is known as the Age of Man, but we're gonna be more progressive than that and use its alternative name, the Age of Humans. Lumbridge belongs to the Kingdom of Mistalin, generally considered to be Gielinor's most powerful realm, and almost exclusively populated by humans. See this other nice-looking city, Falador? It's the capital of Asgarnia, another human realm. What about this giant realm to the west? That would be the Kingdom of Kandarin. There's some pockets of gnomes here and there, but for the most part, that's humans. See that huge continent to the west? Also mostly dominated by human realms, with some dwarves sprinkled in, but they're the exception, not the rule. What about this big stinky looking place to the far east? That's not humans, that's a bunch of evil creatures. But they do rule over an awful lot of unfortunate humans as well, and they'd love nothing more than to take those other humans' shit. But they're having real crippling issues trying to cross this river into the other humans' shit for reasons we'll get into much later. The point is, at this moment in time, the world is dominated by humanity. However, from a historical standpoint, this is quite a novel situation. I'm gonna be splitting this video into two parts. In the first one, I'll be going through the entire history of Gielinor's different ages in a roughly chronological order and summarizing their major events so we can understand how we got here in the first place. Then, once we get near enough to the era that the game is set in right now, part 2 will kick in. The other side of the game's narrative coin is, of course, the stories in which the player plays a role or has a front row seat. So I'll be going through a bunch of different moving parts all around Gielinor that relate to most quests, so that you understand the context for all of the weird and crazy events that happen both in the past and on the way to your quest cape. A few little disclaimers before we get started. There will be spoilers in both sections, obviously, so if you're part of the 1% of players who read quest dialogues and desperately want to experience the full story for themselves, I recommend you go and get a quest cape real quick and come back once you're done. Don't worry, it only takes several hundred hours, I'll be waiting. Secondly, this video is exclusively about the story of old school RuneScape, so as far as I'm concerned, anything that's confirmed in other RuneScape media like RS3 or the various RuneScape books is not canon unless it's been explicitly confirmed in the context of OSRS as well. So don't go commenting something like, "Actually, it's revealed in RS3 that the wise old man fought in the Battle of the Somme and his officer was Tolkien," or you will be tarred feathered, handed over to the pillory guard, and publicly shamed. In the nicest way, of course. We don't condone bullying on this channel. And lastly, if you're a regular on this channel, you'll notice this video is a little different to my normal style. It's already going to be really freaking long, to use the scientific jargon, and making it in the usual way would have meant spending months and months on this project, and I just wasn't into that. Please let me know what you think of this slightly experimental video, and maybe I'll do more like it in the future. Okay, but with that, everyone says you should keep your YouTube intros super brief, so a little over 900 words in sounds like a good place to cut it. Let's get into it. Part 1. The History. Actually, I lied. Here's a quick little rapid fire of Gielinor facts to keep in mind before we get to the actual history. Bear with me, it's for the sake of context, you will not regret it. It's kind of unclear what exactly Gielinor is. I remember reading once that it was a planet, but now I can't find where I read that anymore, so maybe I made it up. Sometimes it's referred to as a realm, a dimension, or a plane of existence, so you can just headcanon whichever one or combination you prefer until it's explicitly confirmed. We do know it's much bigger than what we can see on the world map, because we're aware of a few overseas places so far away that they don't appear on it. Two of them that will be relevant to this video, or at least could be relevant, I still don't know which details I'm gonna gloss over as I'm writing this, are Acheron, a place far to the north that will one day be home to really rad dwarves, and the Wushanko Isles far to the east, which will be home to mostly irrelevant characters and annoying bosses. Also, people on Gielinor sometimes refer to their world as RuneScape, presumably because one of its special features is runes, but I'm making assumptions here, I didn't ask them about it. Anyway, let's talk about the First Age, or the Age of Creation. One day, there's a really powerful dude, so powerful that he can somehow move between planets or planes of existence or dimensions or whatever they are. That dude was called Guthix. You may have heard of him. His symbol looks like a green... let me get back to you on that. One day this green wonky water drop dude is traveling across the planets or dimensions or planes etc. and discovers this place. He thinks it's really damn cool and full of power, which is a recurring theme among the gods. They think Gielinor is an attractive place to flock to because it's filled with power, and it's not fully clear what they mean by that, but it's something related to magic, like how potent magic is in this place, or maybe how accessible and easy it is thanks to the presence of runes. So Guthix thinks to himself that what this sick AF place needs is a bunch of sentient creatures to inhabit it. He sets out and gathers some species he thinks are worthy or something, and leads them to Gielinor through the World Gate. And no, we don't know what exactly the World Gate is, so you can put your hands down. All of this happened over 8,000 years ago and the records are very patchy. Among the first races on Gielinor are gnomes, cats, sheep, humans, shout out to my fellow human homies, and dwarves. During his travels, Guthix also happens to visit a place called Tardiad, which is not a very PC name. There he meets another species he thinks is cool AF, the elves. Except these guys already have a god among them, a very powerful lady made of crystal who discovered them at some point and started simping hard over them. Her symbol is this elegant cyan square. Fortunately for her, they agreed to simp right back and she became their goddess. However, she thought it was sad that they were mortals and that she kept outliving all of them, so she performed a ritual called the Song of Creation, where she put a tiny bit of herself into every single elf to give them crazy long lifespans. Except that had the unintended consequence of binding them to her presence, and so now they're kinda cursed, as in if they're too far away from Seren, it's a real bad time for them, and they eventually die off. I know it doesn't sound like this is related to Gielinor, but bear with me, it's gonna be relevant later. So Guthix arrives in Tardiad and he's like, hey, those elves you got here look sick, and you seem pretty chill too. Shame about that whole accidental curse though, but hear me out. I know a place that's full of magic and looks much cuter the more cool species I populate it with. How about you bring these graceful fellers over there? And who knows, maybe all that magic can help you figure it out. It's a really weird pickup line, but it works wonders on Seren. She's like, come on everyone, let's go into that world gate, whatever it is, and move to Gielinor. So almost all of the elves follow her there. I say almost because one of the OG elven clans refuses and decides to stay behind. We have no idea what happens to them afterwards, but logically they should all be dead by now thanks to the curse, so RIP to this clan. Wait, is it pronounced sewer? And so Gielinor's first age is basically Seren and Guthix guiding the first few species into building advanced and peaceful societies. Arguably the most detailed summary of the first age is part of a quote from Juna. If you don't know who she is, don't worry, she'll come up later. So I'm just gonna read it to you. Myriad and beautiful were the creatures and civilizations of the early ages of the world. Gielinor was a work of art, shaped lovingly over the millennia by the creative mind of Guthix. And I guess we're just gonna forget about Seren, because Juna is a Guthixian. So Gielinor was full of awe-inspiring societies for a couple thousand years. They didn't leave any kind of physical evidence behind, but trust me bro, it was awesome and they all lived happily forever after. But building incredible civilizations is hard work, and at some point Guthix thought he deserved a good nap, or at least that's my interpretation. We don't actually know why he did it, but he went somewhere deep underground and fell into some kind of magical slumber. And trust me, Teardrop Guy is a very deep sleeper. And thus begins the Second Age, or the Golden Age of Zaros. So right now we have a bunch of peaceful societies just doing their thing, an omega powerful Teardrop passed out in a corner, and Mrs. Science Square still chilling with the elves and not really caring about the rest of this super powerful world because she's too busy trying to lift the curse that she accidentally put on the elves. But as the saying goes, when the tear drops away, the greedy gods will play. So at this point, there's seemingly a bunch of other powerful interdimensional tourists visiting Gielinor, and what they see is a land full of magical potential where the Big Daddy is fast asleep, and the only other god with actual roots and influence in this place is playing with crystals in a corner, and too socially awkward to intervene in other people's affairs as long as they leave her beloved pointy-eared pretty boys alone. So like the greedy little opportunists that they are, these guys are like, huh, this seems like a good place to plant my metaphorical flag, spread my influence and increase my power. Therefore, a Congo line of hot new bombshells enter the villa at this point. So please give it up for our 4 brand new Gielinor deities. Saradomin, also known as Mr. Prayer Symbol, comes to this world and first lands his imperial cutter or whatever on the small island of Entrana, which then becomes a super sacred place for his followers, and that's why today it's a really annoying as shit place to visit, since you'll get slapped on both cheeks by monks if you try to bring anything resembling a weapon there, because Saradomin claims to be all peaceful and shit. Next is Armadil, the Blue Wings dude. Well, I say next, we don't know what order they came in, so he's really only next on my list, not necessarily next to arrive. He apparently loves law and justice, having binge-watched a lot of legal dramas lately. He was probably somewhere around here, but not sure. Then a god of the sun dude and a goddess of growth and fertility lady come upon Gielinor. They go to the nearest general store to buy a newcomer map, and for some reason both independently decide that the best place to pitch their tents would be the least habitable part of the mainland, i.e. the giant Kharidian desert. Keep in mind that at this point of our timeline, both the wilderness and Mauritania are beautiful places full of life and green and all the things that the peace and love movement adores. So I don't know why 2 different gods would pick the Kharidian desert as their first Second Age League regions, but you do you, I guess. Maybe they really wanted that Echo KQ blowpipe thing. Finally, Zaros, of the Golden Age of Zaros fame, comes to this world as well. He's kind of the edgy one out. He loves darkness, he loves control, and he wants everything to be his because sharing is for those uncool people who like baking and going outside and the likes. Okay, so these are our main participants for this first edition of the Gielinor Godly Ones reality show. So let's speedrun what happens during the first season. Saradomin brought a whole bunch of his homies, mainly centaurs and Icens. The latter are a large humanoid species who, we are told, are really good PvMers. Since Saradomin settled on Entrana, they're probably like, bro, this tiny island is a little cramped. They look at the map and they notice this big, beautiful patch of land to the east. Remember, Mauritania isn't yet a stinky bog. They start thinking strategically and reason that since those idiots chose the desert as their first region instead, they should be the first ones to pick Mauritania so they can grind Barrows before it's too crowded and it becomes difficult to tell which one is your assigned brother. They travel over there and found the Kingdom of Hallowvale. It's named after the dynasty of their first queen, Efarite Hallow. There's already a bunch of humans living there, but the Icens are like, what are you gonna do about it? You're a fifth of our size and haven't even discovered magic yet. They still allow the humans to live among them, but they're relegated to second-class citizens. Sorry guys. The centaurs presumably stay on and around Entrana, since they're pretty much never brought up in our records of Hallowvale. Armadil is a big fan of all things flying. He was brought up watching My Little Pony and he thought Pegasi were the coolest, so he only brought aviancies with him, a race somewhere between big birds and humanoids. He honestly doesn't seem to do an awful lot for the rest of the Second Age. He'll do a couple slightly relevant things later, but for now let's go to our misguided desert lovers. Tumekin and Elidenis realize that they both settled in the desert. Tumekin is like, hey beautiful, what brought you here? And Elidenis replies, I don't know, I just fucking love sand. Tumekin says, holy shit, I fucking love sand too. And just like that, they become lovebirds. They go on to have 2 children, a son called Icthlorin and a daughter named Amascut. Although we're told they were created from their essence rather than born, so it was done in a very pure and elegant way, not in the gross and distasteful childbirth way. Ew. There's humans living in the desert as well, collectively known as the Menophites. They of course noticed the 2 unbelievably powerful beings who began hanging out around there, and how they managed to procreate without all of that classic revolting exchange of bodily corners, and they are won over. They tell the duo, you guys got so much riz, you should become our gods. Also, this Elidenis chick is so kawaii and precious, we're gonna name our one source of potable water after her, hence the river Elid. Everything is mostly sunshine and rainbows on Gielinor for a while, but Zaros came with his actually really impressive goon squad, and he's not afraid to use it. He's got vampires, he's got demons, and most importantly, he's the kind of edgy guy who doesn't like sharing. So like the entitled dick that he is, he starts yonking territory from his neighbors and picking fights when he walks into bars. Like a proper douchebag. The Second Age will ultimately last for about 2,000 years, during which Zaros slowly expands his empire and consolidates his power. He builds the Zarosian Empire's capital here, Sentistan, which by the end of this era, at its peak, is the largest and wealthiest city in Gielinor's history. V and the First Runecrafting Revolution. Stepping away from the gods for a minute, we also have in the Second Age an interesting event and a huge what-if for humanity. The Fremennik clan, which by the way is the OG tribe of humans on Gielinor, although by now not all humans see themselves as Fremennik anymore because they've moved around and developed their own culture and history, but still all have Fremennik ancestors. The Fremennik still call themselves Fremennik because their lifestyle and customs have remained relatively unchanged through all these generations. Anyway, this is interesting, but besides the point. There's one guy from the Fremennik clan who's now only remembered as V, you might be familiar with him, who goes on an exploration trip around some of the nearby islands. He goes to this island shaped like a moon crescent and finds a cave on its northeastern tip. There he finds 2 things that will play incredibly important roles in the history of Gielinor, so put a mental pin on both of them. First off, he finds a weird glowing giant rock on a pedestal. This thing clearly isn't a natural formation, so he gets curious and touches it. V doesn't know it, but he's just laid his hand on the Stone of Jas, a mysterious artifact of super duper power that even Gothics allegedly used to build the great civilizations of the previous age and shape the world. A bunch of the stone's power gets transferred to V, and he basically gets a rotten potato added to his inventory. In the next cave over, he notices odd formations that were created over time by the Stone of Jas and its radiating power or whatever. This thing clearly isn't a natural formation, so he gets curious and touches it. V doesn't know it yet, but he's just laid his hand on a rune essence rock, a mysterious material of super duper power that even Gothics allegedly used to give the early humans limited access to magic when he felt like it. He comes back to his fellow Fremennik with a rotten potato and some rune essence samples. Everyone is impressed big time by his new ability to access banks anywhere and spawn twisted bows, and he goes on a bunch of adventures doing some heroic stuff all over the place. During one of them, he somehow figures out he can use the rune essence to create runes out of the strange runic altars scattered around the land, and those runes can be used to cast magic. V is super excited. He's like, holy shit, everyone can wield the gods' powers now with this discovery. So he returns to his clan again and gathers them around. Hear me out, he says. Y'all see these rocks with the funny symbols on them? We can use them to alch our junk and buy everything we want instead of having to deforest the entire coastline to build our inefficient wooden houses. And then the Fremennik people go, okay, this is huge. Let's abuse early, abuse often before it's patched out. Except not all of them are happy with that. There's a lot of humans who actually really love living in crappy conditions and struggling to survive. Or at least their strawmen do. Their actual argument is that magic is a gift from the god that's illegitimate and heretical when it comes from humans, which ties back to how Gothics used to host various drop parties with runes in the First Age when he felt like allowing humans to superheat some bars when they were too far from a furnace. It boils down to things have always been that way, so anything different should be avoided, which is still not a great argument and probably gave all the leftist Fremennik tabloids a lot of ammunition against conservatives. But V and his merry men are undeterred, and they embark on a big journey to spread magic across humanity. They travel wherever they can find humans, which means pretty much everywhere, and go looking for big-ass rocks with very specific properties. You see, they figured out how to turn those rocks, and only those rocks, into some kind of teleportation links to the different runic altars. And no, it's not explained how. So they find a bunch of those rocks around human settlements, turn them into the runic altar entrances, and apparently build big temples around them. Or they build the big temples around the actual altars, or both, it's not terribly clear, although considering the very elaborate temples surrounding the real altars themselves, and the large ruins often present around their entrances, it's probably both. The Magic Merrymen are quite happy with how their mission is going. They're slowly managing to democratize magic by making runecrafting available to the masses, meaning humans are seizing the means of resurrection. Not really, because the Archaeus spellbook didn't exist yet, but while the Magic Merrymen were having the time of their lives, the Fremennik neoconservative majority is beyond donezo with the whole situation. They think heresy is spreading across the land, and that they're gonna get smitten to smithereens by the gods or something, so they need to take actions before humanity's living conditions become too bearable. They drag the Magic Merrymen back home by their earlobes and give them a stern talking to. But what do you know, their argument that humans should remain as mid as they've always been fails to convince the naughty runecrafting enjoyers. However, getting rid of them all would be a bit of a social faux pas, since V, their greatest hero ever who's revered as a god, is among them. Oh, by the way, they're justifying V using magic and still being considered a superstar by claiming that he's earned the right to use magic. Unlike all those other plebs who didn't have the sterling judgment to randomly find an overpowered artifact in the wild, the Fremennik are just full of wisdom and common sense like that. Anyway, they gather all the magic lovers and tell them that if they like that little island and its heretical little grey rocks so much, they can jolly well stay there forever. V and his homies are banished to Lunar Isle, and the art of runecrafting dies off on the mainland, since they no longer have access to rune essence anymore. Keep in mind that at this point, the only known source is on Lunar Isle. The Magic Merrymen get tired of being associated with a Shrek meme and rebrand themselves to the Moon Clan. They're now also pretty limited in the magic they can do, since they no longer have access to all those altars they put on the mainland. Pretty unlucky. Instead, they turn to the one altar the Fremennik can't restrict their access to, this one, and they start crafting astral runes with impunity. Over time, they develop what's known today as lunar magic, whose spells are typically a lot less geared towards grievous bodily harm than other spellbooks, and more focused on useful everyday shit like baking pies, tanning leather, and creating compost. Generations upon generations of lunar boys got 200 mil runecrafting and magic, so they took to Reddit to complain that they deserved some kind of reward for their multi-generational efforts. So the great Jagex in the sky puts out a poll asking if the Moon Clan should be allowed to cast lunar magic without using runes. It passes at 82%, so now these guys can just float about all day long and rub it in that we puny mainland adventurers need runes just to mimic a fraction of their powers. And that, my friends, is pretty much the only interesting thing to happen around the Fremennik province for the next many thousands of years. So we're gonna forget about humanity's first tribe for a while and return to our other Second Age shenanigans. The Kharidian-Zarosian War. As a little refresher, last time we saw the gods, they were all being kinda whiny and selfish about yonking each other's chunks of this supposedly uber-powerful land. At some point, there is trouble brewing between the Zarosian and Kharidian empires, and I don't mean that they're both trying to complete the medium Mauritania diary. Zaros is all about conquering shit, and the Menephites are all about keeping their own shit as unconquered as possible, so at some point something has to give, and therefore Gielinor witnesses the start of what is possibly the deadliest conflict of the Second Age, if only because we don't have much information about any of the other ones, but we know that this one will turn out really grim. You've seen the title of this section already, so you don't get any kudos for guessing what it's called. When the Kharidian-Zarosian War begins, Tumekin and Elidinis gather their home homeboys around and tell them, listen here my dudes, deadass this Zaros guy ain't a noob. This is gonna be a tough fight, no cap. The point I'm trying to make with this urban slang I'm only half convinced I understand is that the Menophites and their gods are keenly aware that the odds are stacked against them. Also, they've been nicknaming the Zarosians the Ruinous Powers, which isn't relevant, but it is a cool name. The Zarosian Empire is the world's foremost superpower with a massive army of battle-hardened and merciless monsters, while the Kharidian Empire is a bunch of dudes living in a desert. Kinda weird that Zaros even wants to annex this crap, but maybe he's going for a completionist run. The Menefite gods know they have to do something or their realm is more cooked than this chicken which has by now been spit roasting for the better part of a quarter century. Tumekin gives his homies a bunch of overpowered weapons, most famously Tumekin and Elidinis' Wardens, a pair of war automatons so-called because both gods imbued one of them with their power. Meanwhile, their two children, Icthlarin and Amascut, aren't high enough in smithing to contribute to the weapon making, but they're more optimistic about their hidden charisma stat, so they leave Gielinor in search of otherworldly allies. The first part of the war goes as you'd expect if you've been paying attention. Having the Wardens is great and all, but you can't hold a whole front line with just a pair of metal gears, so the Zarosians begin steadily ice barraging their way through the desert. But then, in their hour of despair, when they think all hope is lost, they look to the east and see Icthlarin with a bunch of unknown gooners. Turns out during his travels he ended up in Freneske, a mysterious plane of existence, or dimension or planet, where he met these guys. Enter the Majorat, a species whose members will have a huge impact for pretty much the rest of our history lesson, so do remember them. You don't need to commit the spelling to memory though. I, for one, can never remember how many R's there are and where the H is. Those guys are something else entirely. Their magic levels are insanely high, and they've somehow managed to hack the servers and use demonic pacts in the main game. In roughly the time it takes to Google the right spelling of Majorat, they've already turned the tide of the war, and the Zarosian troops are feeling like first-time PKers being ambushed by a clan in Multi. They reconsider their life choices and start running back home fast enough to get 99 agility by the time they cross the Shante Pass. The Majorat become known as Icthlarin's stern judges, and there is much rejoicing in the Menefite camp. Unfortunately for them, this is only the first of many twists in this war. Among the Majorat is a deceitful little bugger by the name of Slisky. Put the biggest available pin or post-it next to his name, he's gonna come up a lot. He's also very close to my heart due to me pronouncing his name Slisk when I made my first ever lore video, which basically got me cancelled by half the viewership. I'm really sorry guys, I was young and uneducated back in the bygone era of early 2025. Unlike most realms dominated by gods at this point, the Menephites have their own civilian government, and the gods act more as a guiding presence rather than dictators like most other realms. And allegedly during the conflict, the Menephites get a new pharaoh named Osmumten. You may have heard of him, but if not, don't sweat it, we'll cover some of his story later. Sometime after this leadership change, Slisky decides to break the bro code and betray Icthlarin. He defects to Zaros, and convinces the other Majorat to do the same with promises of, I don't know, free cookies and photos of cute puppies. The pendulum swings yet again, and the Zarosians pretend this was part of the plan all along and resume the invasion with an even more overpowered army. The Menephites look east again, hoping for another miracle, but all they can see is the blazing sun damaging them when their water skins run out. With basically no hope of survival for his followers in sight, Tumekin decides that he's had a good run, but it's over now. Maybe next time he'll consider picking something other than the desert for a starting position. He goes to the front line, turns around to give his side a good salute, and straight up explodes, like he's fashioned himself a vest made out of 20 million chinchompas. Tumekin dies, obviously, RIP fellow sunbro, but it has the desired effect. Many a Menephite gets friendly fired by the explosion, but the Zarosian army gets Control X'd out of existence, and even the vast majority of the Majorat get wiped out, although since they're snitches, I'd say they had it coming. OG snitch Slisky survives though. Other desert shenanigans. War is over in the Kharidian desert, hooray! Sadly, it leaves some long-lasting consequences to the Menephites as a parting gift. Elidinis goes to Pharaoh Osmumten and gives him a bunch of OP weapons, mostly confiscated from the people now that they don't need it anymore, including the Wardens and Tumekin's Shadow, a powerful AF staff created by her boo. She understandably needs some therapy after the biggest war in history decimated her followers and caused her husband to self-delete, so she retires from Gielinor for a little while, by which I mean we're not gonna hear from her ever again. Pharaoh Osmumten does the responsible thing and seals away all those ridiculously powerful weapons and artifacts in the Yaltavas pyramid, which was originally built as his future tomb. Shortly after, his people rise up and murder poor Osmumten after blaming him for the mass destruction and casualties of the war. Classic human scapegoating behavior. And while many societies continue to exist in the desert, the Kharidian Empire ceases to exist as a political entity without a unifying leader, or god for that matter. Next, we need to talk about Amascut. Not that long ago, she was just a chill cat girl, and now she's witnessed her brother getting stabbed in the back by guys who might as well be demigods, her dad become a lunar crater, her people go full French Revolution on their leader just because they needed an outlet for their anger, her mother saying "fuck it, I'm out." So yeah, in brief, she's seen some shit. The whole thing becomes her coming-of-age story, but with the worst possible arc. She goes full edgelord, tries to have a legal name change to the Devourer, and shows she's serious about it by killing everyone she can and consuming their souls, including those who were once her most dedicated worshippers. This doesn't land very well among the Amascut fandom. I think the rebrand was a little too sudden for them. She should probably have hired a PR consultant beforehand. All the Amascut priestesses are like #NotMyCatwoman and unite their power to perform a ritual which has two main effects. First, it binds her to a human form, which severely reduces her power, and second, it curses her by preventing people from willingly following or worshipping her. Lady Devourer throws a tantrum and responds with the biggest no you she can muster, using what power she can still access to curse the priestesses right back and turn them into cats. After the whole thing, she becomes afraid of cats and grows an unreasonable hatred towards them. Her brother Icthlorin, being a based cat person, fears for their safety and makes a deal with the Sphinx. He gives him goated superpowers and immortality in exchange for him becoming the protector of cats. This is honestly kind of a weird plotline. There aren't any major events I want to dive into before we move on to the climax of the Second Age, so instead let me rapid fire all the minor ones and then we can get to the fun part. At some unknown point, another god joins the fray. Barrows, the god of war. It seems like one day he just noticed other gods were beating the crap out of each other around here, and he didn't want to miss out on the cathartic violence. He found a bunch of dumb creatures in a place called Ubiusk, which included such intellectual powerhouses as goblins, orcs, and ogres. He thought they made for perfect soldiers since they mostly lacked the mental capacity to understand that he was just a crazy dude sending them to their near certain deaths. He basically kidnaps all of them and goes to the Feldip Hills to start playing armchair general with his dispensable followers, as far as we know just for the sake of fighting war forever. Barrows gets a solid 0.2 out of 10 on the good guy scale. He's basically the bloke your parents always warned you not to talk to. Next, cast your mind back to near the start of the video when I mentioned a land far to the north of the mainland. Out there is the cold northern landmass of Acheron, and somewhere in it is a city we're told is gosh darn cool. It's called Imcandoria, and it's home to some dwarves who think it's so gosh darn cool they've built their entire identity around it and called themselves Imcando dwarves. Those dwarves are all 99 mining, smithing, and magic, and therefore love creating cool metal things and enchanting them to make them all the more gosh darn cool. Records of their history are very patchy, but near the end of the Second Age, they discover what they call a weird idol on an island called the Isle of Garmer. They're intrigued by that thing, so they make a FedEx account and have it overnight shipped back to Imcandoria. It's not clear exactly what happens, but only 3 months later, the dwarves who discovered the idol return to Imcandoria and find it empty. Ooh, the foreshadowing. They go to the city temple where they find something. I literally just watched the movie The Substance last night, and it kinda reminds me of that, but I think I'll let them describe it for themselves. Here's a quote from the book Imcandoria's Fall, originally written by one of the dwarfs present. "The temple was a scene from a nightmare. Piles of bodies, pools of blood, a large globulous mass sat hungrily on a throne of oily black rock. A shock of tentacles capped with claws dangled above its 3 pulsing bulbous eyes. The elders circled the creature, chanting incantations in a strange unknown tongue, covered head to toe in a mixture of blood and thick black sludge. They paid us no attention until the creature noticed our presence and began screaming. A fight soon broke out, and the temple quickly turned into a blaze, the flames leaking the ceiling. The harsh cackle from the elders as they burned pierced our minds with unimaginable terror. I don't know why I did that accent, the Imkondo dwarves deserve better. But yeah, shit's gone really awry out there, and the remaining Imkondo dwarves agree that their beloved city is now the polar opposite of gosh darn cool, and decide to sail away in search of a new home. Keep all of that little subplot in mind, it'll become important soonish. Also during the Second Age, the original Emir's Arena gets built, aka the dual arena for us OGs. That's about it. We don't know when or why or by who. My money is on the Kharidian Empire having built it before its collapse. Speaking of Desert Boys and Zaros Bros, after their little round of wanton violence, the remaining Majorat, which now numbered only in the few dozens, were aligned with Zaros. As was made clear by their quarterly performance during the Kharidian-Zarosian War, these guys meant business, and many of them rose through the ranks of the Zarosian institutions over the rest of the Second Age. As I said earlier, the Majorat will play a part in many important historical and contemporary events after their spectacular introduction to Gielinor, and there's a surprising amount of named Majorat, but since they only play a part in several mostly disconnected storylines, I'm only going to name them when they become relevant rather than drowning you in weird names that we're not gonna remember. Also, I don't know why Zaros felt so willing to promote the Majorat into positions of power and authority, when literally one of the first things they did on Gielinor was betray someone, but hey, I'm sure that was just a one-off. And for the record, this is not foreshadowing, because by definition, foreshadowing is supposed to be subtle. Zamorak's Betrayal. Alright, with those notes out of the way, let's explore how the Second Age concluded with a Majorat betraying Zaros. Enter an obscure guy you've probably never heard of, Zamorak. Zamorak is a Majorat who reached the rank of general in the Zarosian army. He became pretty much the second most important military figure after Zaros himself. But Zamorak has a little character quirk called boundless ambitions. He sees this big mighty empire that his master has created, and he's like, wow, that thing is sick, I wish I had one of those. He starts networking among the Zarosian elite and sending out subtle feelers to see if anyone would, hypothetically, be possibly not too upset if their leader was to, perhapsingly, become less alive at some point, allegedly. Zamorak starts weaving a web of rebellious important imperial figures, swaying them by promising them the classics, land, power, money, etc. Again, there's many conspirators and several of them will come up later in various contexts, so you know the drill. I'll name them when they become relevant, and for now we will refer to them collectively as the Backstab Amigos. Eventually, the Backstab Amigos count among their ranks some of the biggest names in the Empire, and they're all pretty eager to overthrow their lord. Unfortunately, they're very reluctant to make their move, because they know Zaros is well out of their league, and no matter how prepared you are, a bunch of level 20s requires more than enthusiasm to defeat a max geared level 126. However, while this whole conspiracy business is happening, a for now completely unrelated plot is unfolding in the Zarosian Empire. You see, as someone who loves conquest and expansion, Zaros is a big fan of mind-bogglingly powerful artifacts. He's lucky enough to have in his possession 3 of the most unbalanced items to ever be coded into existence. Now pay attention, because all 3 are important. First is the Stone of Jas. Remember that one? It's the one whose wibbly-wobbly magic turned V into a Fremenic top G. After that event, it disappeared from the cave on Lunar Isle, and the chain of custody isn't terribly clear after that, but what matters for us today is that by the end of the Second Age it was in the Zarosian capital, Sentistan. Second is the Elder Horn. This thing is said to be even older than the gods themselves, and to allow its user to exert absolute control over anything, although we never see anyone use it in that capacity, so we're gonna have to take the Majorat's word for it. For all we know, they could have just bought it from a dollar store. Lastly, the third one is the Staff of Something. Okay, that's not actually its name, but we don't know what it used to be called at the time, only that today it's called the Staff of Armadil, which may or may not be due to events which have not happened yet at this point of our timeline. So for now, let's forget about this minor spoiler and call it the Staff of Something. Okay, so about this second plot happening in the Zarosian Empire. All of the following we discover during the Curse of the Empty Lord mini-quest, which is kinda like a one small favor-like thing where you meet a bunch of cursed ghosts who send you to other cursed ghosts so that you can discover why they became cursed ghosts in the first place. Meet Valdez. He's an explorer and certified Saradomin fanboy. One day he's out exploring some abandoned underground temple, and bro basically trips on one of the craziest artifacts out there, the Staff of Something, of one paragraph ago fame. Our boy Valdez is like, holy crap, I don't know how on Gillinor this shit was completely unguarded, but I gotta bring it back to my lord and savior Mr. Prayer symbol to make him even greater, and then maybe everyone will stop making fun of me by calling me Valdez nuts. He leaves the underground temple and makes for Entrana, Saradomin's home base. On the way, he runs into a guy named Renard. If you couldn't tell by the fact that he's wearing a semi-transparent variation of the rogue outfit, this dude is not exactly a model citizen. He notices Valdez is carrying a suspiciously valuable-looking package and goes full highwayman on the poor explorer. After the obligatory sit kid, Renard picks up the Staff of Something and probably has a very similar reaction to the guy in that one famous clip of the max cash stack coin pouch update glitch thing. He's like, holy crap, I don't know how on Gillinor this legendary artifact of power was being carried by this complete noob, but I gotta bring this back to... Actually, what the fuck do I do with this? Very fair reaction, to be honest. He does what everyone should when pondering a decision that could have far-reaching implications for the future of the entire world. He knocks some shots down and gets completely shit-faced at the local tavern. Among his drinking buddies that night is a part-time Zarosian messenger, part-time crook Renard has employed before, Karim. Drunken Renard confesses to him that he picked up some extremely valuable loot earlier and really wants to find an under-the-table kind of buyer for it. Now, I just said Karim was a Zarosian messenger, but more precisely, he's been a courier for none other than General Zamorak, leader of the Backstab Amigos, and the messenger really likes him, like to a frankly weird degree. Here's a direct quote from him talking about Zamorak during Curse of the Empty Lord. I could see great things in store for him even then. He had a kind of brilliant ruthlessness and that special kind of vicious streak you see so rarely. Really weird and creepy stuff. I would not want to be sitting next to that guy on a bus. So he figures he should reach out to his senpai Zamorak to see if he'd be interested in the legendary Staff of Something. But things might not be that easy, as there is a Saradominist spy hiding among the Zarosians who finds out about the drunken fool trying to sell a crazy artifact. Her name is Lenissa, and she wants to quickly inform Saradomin of what's going on. However, there's a Majorat called Lucian who's keeping an eye out for her because he's suspicious of her allegiances. Because of his scrutiny, she very much doubts she can reach Saradomin without blowing her cover. Instead, she takes the less risky route of informing her superior, a wizard named Dalak. She figures since there's heat on her but not on him, he can be the one to inform their god. So Dalak learns that Zamorak may be about to purchase the Staff of Something, but he gets an idea so outrageously brilliant that he will go on to regret it for the next 6,000 years. You see, as a good little spy, Dalak is aware of the Backstab Amigos, and he figures that they only really have a shot at taking Zaros down if they have something like, I don't know, a relic of immense power or something. And so instead of telling Saradomin what's going on as fast as possible, he makes the gamble that helping the Backstab Amigos create chaos in the Zarosian Empire will pay off in the long run. He figures Zaros would sense the staff long before Zamorak can even use it against him, so he secretly casts a concealment spell on it to make sure the traitors can pull off their betrayal before they are discovered. Meanwhile, Karim meets up with Zamorak and asks if he'd be interested in buying the Staff of Something. Zamorak is like, mate, are you serious? Hell yeah, I want that thing. And before the night is over and Renard can even sober up, he's already sold the secretly magically concealed artifact to the scheming Zarosian general. And just like that, the Backstab Amigos have acquired the solution they were seeking in order to pull off their plan. Not thanks to their competence or strategic planning, but due to a massive string of coincidences. Zamorak calls an emergency meeting, and he and his co-conspirators agree they sure as hell will never get a better opportunity. It's time to pull the trigger on this coup attempt. The Backstab Amigos are all super high-ranking and powerful Zarosians, so nobody gets suspicious when they go to the Imperial Palace. They storm it and take everyone by surprise. Zamorak's mates distract Zaros' bodyguards, and my boy Zami lives up to the stupid name I gave his little clique when he plunges the Staff of Something right into Zaros' back. Zaros goes, "Oh, now you've gone and done it. Come here, you treacherous little bastard." And they proceed to have a slap fight. Their slapping levels are pretty even thanks to Zaros having a stat-reducing debuff stuck in his back, but at some point the two brawlers fall in such a way that the Staff of Something ends up impaling both of them. Somehow, this triggers some slightly contrived wibbly-wobbly magic thing that ends up transferring Zaros' power to Zamorak. Power-wise, Zamorak becomes king shit of Fuck Mountain, while Zaros starts slipping into a state of deadness. But before he fades to nothingness, he curses the people who had a hand in his downfall. Although it seems it had little effect on those who are immortal, which was the majority of the backstab amigos, so pretty unfortunate for Zaros. It did, however, have an effect on all those humans who had something to do with the Staff of Something, ending up in Zamorak's hands though. Hence, the ghosts we meet during Curse of the Empty Lord mini-quest still roaming Gielinor and being unable to interact with the living or proceed to the afterlife. Thus, Valdez the Explorer, Renard the Thief, Karim the Messenger, Lenissa the Spy, Dalak the Wizard, as well as someone I've yet to mention, Vigora, get cursed. Vigora had nothing to do with the staff, he was just another one of Zaros' generals, the only human one in fact, and one of Zamorak's best buds in his plot to overthrow Zaros, so the curse applied to him too. He's also the one who had the Slayer Tower built, that building sometimes being known as Vigora's Folly, and he used to wield a vicious chain mace in combat, which after his death ended up in the hands of other Zamorakians until its final owner died and became a revenant, so that's why it's dropped by them. Sorry I'm speedrunning Vigora's story here, but it's not that long or interesting, so I might as well do it now so we don't have to worry about him ever again. But back to the main event. The Backstab Amigos have succeeded in their coup and overthrown the god at the head of the world's mightiest ever realm, and things will truly never be the same again on Gielinor, which calls for a new age. The Third Age, or the God Wars. Ah, the God Wars. They're very close to my heart, having been the subject of my first ever lore video, which was the one that put this channel on the map, incidentally. Very nostalgic. Anyway, you should check it out after this video if you want to dive into the Third Age in much more details than we'll be going into in this one. Like we did last time, let's have a quick summary of what's going on in Gielinor at the dawn of this new age before we tackle its many events. The sun is rising for the first time over a Zarosian empire without a god to lead it, and everyone in the realm is gonna have to choose between the loyalist side and the new Zamorakian faction. The empire is squeezed right between the two main Saradominist strongholds, the island of Entrana to the west and the Ician-led kingdom of Hallowvale to the east. To the south, the Kharidian desert is very much fractured and weak compared to what it once was. It's now for the most part a bunch of independent communities, and compared to other areas, the gods aren't doing much at all to help the people there. Tumekin's 4 avatars are doing what they can, but as gods go, they're pretty puny. And as for Icthlorin, he's a little bit on the busy side dealing with his sister Amaskut, who, as you'll recall, woke up one day and chose violence. Seren still hasn't been properly socialized after all this time and refuses to engage with her divine peers, content to play with her elven dolls in the western corner of the continent. And Armadil and Bandos are both still there, and both still mostly irrelevant for now. Early Third Age events. So overnight, the world's biggest superpowered slipped on some camel dung and hit its head on a discarded pet rock. As you might expect, everyone is a little taken aback by the news, and a lot of important actors believe they must act now while uncertainty and confusion still reign supreme. Saradomin and Armadil go to Sentistan and have a little chat with Zamorak. On the one hand, they're pretty stoked that their greatest threat has been yeeted from existence, but on the other hand, they're not very stoked that Zamorak yeeted a god from existence, because that means they could be next. They tell their new bro Zami that they're really glad he had his little fun, but it's time for him to piss off. Zamorak gets banhammered from Gielinor, and the two gods share the content of his loot key. Since he's already in Sentistan, Saradomin figures he might as well flex his high thieving level to all these Zarosian plebs, and yonks the Stone of Jas. Hope you still remember that one, cause it's not even close to the last time it'll come up, and we are not doing a summary of its history. Meanwhile, Armadil claims the Staff of Something, which from now on we can finally refer to as the Staff of Armadil. Now it's time to introduce someone important, Perseria. Perseria is the Zarosian Empire's Praefectus Classis, aka Admiral of the Fleet. She's siding with the Loyalists in this mess. She gets the word that her godfather dictator Zaros has been specced out of existence by Zamorak, and she is tasked with securing the only awesome sauce relic that wasn't stolen from the Loyalists, the Elder Horn. Gilinor's great relics of power go through a short game of musical chairs as everything gets relocated after the fall of Zaros. Perseria is a siren native to the Wushanko Isles, which we very briefly mentioned roughly 7,500 words ago, so she decides to send the horn over there for safekeeping, far away from the chaos of the mainland. Saradomin has to choose where to store his new toy. Will he choose a tiny island defended by monks and horses with bows? Or the huge kingdom populated with buff warriors with an affinity for light magic, which is a well-known weakness to their most dangerous enemies? To nobody's surprise at all, he sends it to Hallowvale. At some point he founded a knightly organization composed only of his most loyal and powerful followers, the Justiciar Order. He handpicks the very elite of this group of the very elites for a special mission. Justiciars Aliyah and Zakaria, known also as the Justiciar of the Lion and of the Owl respectively, are tasked with protecting the Stone of Jas. They are not told what exactly this giant scaly crystal ball is. As far as they know, it's just some kind of magical pebble called Saradomin's Eye. They decide to build a temple to house it and protect it, and they end up building it at the bottom of the sea somewhere south of Hallowvale, of all places. And because they were told that what they were guarding was Saradomin's Eye, they christened this place the Temple of the Eye. Yup, that's where the name comes from. Then we have our boy Armadil taking the staff of his own namesake west. He puts it on the ground in the Temple of Ikov and goes, mission accomplished, the staff is safe now. Except as he leaves, he remembers how this thing ended up in Zamorak's hands in the first place because it was found undefended in an underground temple. He leverages the processing power of at least 3 brain cells and creates the Guardians of Armadil, an order whose only purpose becomes the protection of the staff. Mission accomplished for real this time. Now back to the Elderhorn, because there's a big twist. You know how I said this Perseria chick had it sent to the Wushanko Isles? That was just bait. She sent a fake one overseas to get the heat off of the real one, which stayed aboard her ship inside her personal cabin. Except she figured it might not be the safest place for it. Good call there, I agree. So she arranges to have it stored in one of the safest places in all of Gilinor, the Ancient Vault, which the Zarosians built in the desert at some point, which is not really explained at all. As far as I know, there's no records telling us that the Zarosian Empire had expanded into the Kharidian Desert after their failed attempt during the Kharidian-Zarosian War, so I guess we're just supposed to assume they tried again later and managed to get at least this far into the desert. Except User to the north is supposedly not aligned with Zaros during the God Wars based on stuff that happens later, so I guess they conquered around it and look, it doesn't matter, and it was probably just a lore oversight when they made Desert Treasure 2, so forget I said anything. All that matters is that the Zarosians built a basically impenetrable structure here called the Ancient Vault, okay? Perseria secretly travels there alongside 3 other loyalists. All 4 of them are very important and powerful members of the Empire and deserve a short introduction. Besides our favorite Praefectus classes Perseria, present in this meeting are the following. A siren only known as the Whisperer. Just about everything about her, including her name and rank, is classified, so all we have to go on is that she's a big deal, and a mysterious one at that. Vardorvis, the Empire's Carnifex Maximus, aka High Executioner. He's a vampire with a big ego. And Duke Sukelis, a high-ranking Zarosian commander who's now, basically its de facto leader after Zamorak's betrayal and defection. These fantastic 4 hide the Elderhorn away inside the vault, locking it behind layers of protection. One can only get in if they know Zarosian magic, also known today as ancient magic, and if they can bring 4 different keys in the form of medallions. Each of the Fantastic 4 keeps a medallion, and they go back to their new routine of trying to hold together what's left of their godless empire. Perseria has a dance party now that the horn is secured, but she's not satisfied with only having a third of the OG Zarosian relics. Some of her scouts have already noticed that some shit is going down somewhere in the sea south of Hallowvale, and after some digging they reported back that the Stone of Just was in a temple down there, which they believe is kinda whack, and fair enough. Perseria has a master plan in mind. She knows the Justiciars are dummy strong, and she's not convinced she can just sail there with a big force without raising some alarms and inviting enemy reinforcements. Instead, she wants to lead a small infiltration force there and only then teleport the bulk of her forces to the temple before the enemy can react to their presence. In the armchair general community, this is what is commonly known as a sensible plan. It's simple and creative, and it gets the multi-seal of approval. She does manage to slip in with a couple goons and the Battle of the Eye begins, but the other well-known thing in the armchair general community is that no plan survives contact with the enemy. She casts her teleportation spell to summon her army, but fails to take into account how powerful a plot device the Stone of Jas is. It warps the spell's magic due to dramatic storytelling reasons, and instead it opens a portal to the Scar, a really ugly, stinky and dangerous part of the Abyss, which is basically a weird dimension between dimensions holding all of those other dimensions together. Hope you're still following. Abyssal creatures start flooding the temple and all hell breaks loose. The Zarosians start retreating back to their ship and regretting having gotten out of bed that morning, while the Justiciars are kinda left holding the bag. The portal swallows most of the Zarosian ships, RIP Zarosian Navy, but Justiciar Aliyah does manage to somehow use the magic of the Stone of Jas to close the portal. Again, very potent plot device, that thing. When the dust settles, she realizes that Saradomin's eye is obviously no longer safe in this place since 1. The rift might reopen at any point, and 2. Somehow their enemies got wind of its location. She has the artifact relocated to a cave, which in the RuneScape 3 continuity becomes the Fist of Guthix, which is statistically one of the few good memories you may still have of that game. It's not clear to me where that cave is located geographically, but it won't really matter in our story. Justiciar Aliyah also creates the Great Guardian and its army of mini-me's to protect the temple, which I feel is kind of unnecessary. I mean, they're at the bottom of the sea, just collapse the whole thing, and if a monster comes through the portal, it's not gonna have a good time, is it? But then I guess we wouldn't have gotten this useful runecrafting outfit out of it, so I guess all is forgiven. Now that we've resolved what happens to Gilinor's OP artifacts early into the Third Age, time to cast our eye northwest. In this little forlorn corner of, at the time, Fortin 3 province, but today deep wilderness, lies an odd shrine, which reminds me of that one average X fan versus average Y enjoyer meme. There, the Majorat go through a rare and weird ceremony called the Ritual of Rejuvenation. The specifics are vague and mysterious and apparently have something to do with planetary alignment. But whatever unsettling shit goes on there, we at least know that the point is to help extend their lifespans by sacrificing one of them in order for the other ones to get stronger and restore their life force. Easy access to the shrine was great news for the Zarosians when the Majorat were all on their side, but now there's a bunch of them siding with Zamorak's rebellion, and suddenly it's no longer such great news that traitors can go and have a metaphorical sauna and massage there. The Loyalists must be really pissed at the Majorat because they send arguably their most powerful asset to secure the shrine, Nex. She's this slightly unsettling chicken mutant thing, and is so strong that many of her enemies think she's straight up invincible. She leads a small force to the shrine so that only the Majorat loyalists can have access to the Ritual of Rejuvenation, but Saradomin learns of this and thinks it could be a good opportunity to get rid of this pretty frightening threat. He sends some of his warriors to the ritual site to enact a genius plan, which probably sounds a lot less genius to the poor mofos who will actually have to carry it out. Their mission is to bait her ass into a large cavern some way south and imprison her there with a magical enchantment that will seal her within. And it works. She takes the lure, goes into the cavern, and gets magically sealed inside the deeper part of the cave network, where everything is also frozen so the Zarosians can't try any funny business to get out of there. Hooray! Except a whole bunch of Saradominists die for the sake of this clever ploy. But that's okay, they're just soldiers, so we don't care about them. Mission accomplished. This is now the ancient prison. Well, not quite, since it's not ancient yet at this point, but we modern adventurer bros and sisters born in the future know it as the ancient prison. The fates of the Fantastic Four. Right, so that was a whole bunch of stuff happening right as the Third Age begins, which will set up important stuff later. Now I'm gonna break the timeline a bit just so we can talk about the Fantastic Four. Not all of their stories unfold at the same time, but most of them kinda do, and I'd rather group them together and resolve their plotlines now so we don't need to bring them up later again. Let's start with Perseria. She's the easiest since we're already most of the way through her story. After attempting to James Bond her way to the Stone of Jas, which you'll recall went extremely poorly, her ship was among the ones swallowed up by the portal to the Scar. The Zarosian Navy wasn't the only victim of this interdimensional vacuuming incident though. The portal also sucked up a really Monka-esque creature, as my Discord buddies would say, the Leviathan. Both it and Perseria's ship end up on this tiny island of the Scar. and while we don't exactly have video evidence of what happens to our dear Zarosian admiral, it's safe to assume it wasn't pleasant considering Exhibit A, what's left of her ship being smashed to fuck, and Exhibit B, the medallion she was supposed to guard with her life later being found by the adventurer on this little pile of rubble. You don't get any investigation XP for figuring out what happened to our first fantastic feller. Two of the Fantastic Four, Vardorvis and the Whisperer, go on a road trip to Lassar after the whole Elderhorn business. Lassar was a fortress built near the western border of the Zarosian Empire on today's Ice Mountain. I need you now to go back to two of the many mental bookmarks we've gone over so far. First one is Slisky, the deceitful Majorat who first convinced his tribe to defect to Zaros in the Last Age, and second is the Imkondo dwarves who were uprooted from their ancestral homeland after that mysterious idol thing they found led to some really unsettling shit over there. The Imkondo dwarves are tight with Saradomin, and he offered them Lassar as a new home for their race in exchange for taking it themselves from the Zarosian loyalists stationed there, which, when you think about it, is a really crap deal. Take the thing by yourself and I'll let you keep the thing? What is Saradomin even offering here? Anyway, the Imkondo halflings besiege Lassar, and this is a pretty significant historical event, so let's do a roll call for the important figures present. On the Zarosian side, we have two of the Fantastic Four stationed here, Vardorvis and the Whisperer. The ultimate authority in Lassar is an unnamed High Magister. He's not important personally, but the fact that he's the one in actual command is. Also present is our treacherous Majorat Slisky. We'll get into why he's here in a moment, but first let's see who's important on the sieging side. The commander of the Imkondo dwarves is Yonrith Lovacane. He's not really important yet, and there's no other dwarf of note. So Slisky is here in Lassar because the Zarosians did a bunch of deep excavating under the fortress and found some kind of weird totem which piqued Slisky's interest. The totem had some unspecified magic about it that seemed somehow related to the Shadow Realm. But Multi, what's the Shadow Realm, I hear you ask? For the most part, it's another plot device. It's gonna come up a few times. It's basically a parallel dimension we are told is full of unspecified power and really difficult to access or study properly. The point is, Slisky is convinced that this totem thing can help deepen their understanding of the Shadow Realm and even potentially tap into its vague power based on something. I don't know. That's also why the Whisperer is here. She's an enigma wrapped around a mystery, or however the saying goes, so obviously she's an expert on the Shadow Realm, and Slisky has called for her personally to come investigate this totem because this story wouldn't be nearly as interesting without some kind of crazy scientist-style research going horribly wrong. Now, there's something here that makes no sense to me, so by all means enlighten me in the comments if you know. But for some reason, Slisky is convinced that the Imkondo dwarves are here because the artifact under Lassar is the same one that led to the fall of Imkandoria. I don't know if I missed a piece of dialogue or what, but I have no clue where that belief comes from. I mean, he's not even completely wrong, but in any case, he thinks the dwarves are here not to take over the place, but to get to that thing. And he tells the Whisperer to get into crazy scientist mode and to take any resources she needs to extract whatever it is they're trying to gain from it. However, some of the Imkondo dwarves leave mid-siege for unexplained reasons, including their commander Yonrith Lovacane. You also don't score any points for guessing where they end up going. When I introduced Vardorvis earlier, I mentioned he had a bit of an ego, and here is the reason. He notices some of their enemies are piecing out, and he's convinced himself in his mind that he's a real macho vampire and that his prey can never run away from him. So he takes it personally and leaves Lassar just to go after those dwarves he has no personal investment in. Kinda whack if you ask me. We'll resolve their story after we're done with Lassar though. Eventually it becomes clear to the Zarosians that they ain't winning this siege, but Slisky still has a bee in his bonnet about this whole artifact thing, and the lack of results from the Whisperer's research is making him a little angsty. He orders every effort be diverted to the totem study, and that the Undercity be completely sealed off to buy them some time. Except the city's High Magister is like, hey, hold on a minute there, brother. I'm the one making the calls here and I'm not really into this plan of yours. The Whisperer is unimpressed by his legal authority and Max hits his ass all the way to Death's domain, then murders the entire research team as well. I'm not actually sure why. You'd think that'd be pretty useful if you're trying to research something, but that's what she does. Now that the legal hurdle is out of the way, the Lassar Undercity gets sealed and the Imkondo dwarves take over the upper parts. They found their first mainland city, Camdozal, and live there for generations without realizing there's some really creepy shit going on deep under their feet. The Zarosians who remain there are completely cut off from the world, and slowly the artifact reveals its weird magic as being a level 100 passive corruption spell. One after the other, the poor souls stuck there succumb to its influence, and they all begin to worship it. They collectively become a Lovecraftian cult called the Silent Choir, and all pass away worshipping the totem to death. Pretty grim stuff. The Whisperer is uber powerful and uber strong-willed, but even she starts losing her mind to the totem's influence, until one day she just submerges herself in the city's sunken cathedral and goes into the magic equivalent of cryogenic sleep. Also, she of course still has her ancient vault medallion on her. Now about those deserting dwarves in Vardorvis. The dwarves head west and still continue going west even when they hit the ocean. They travel overseas and end up in Zea, a continent that's completely uninhabited. Almost. More on that later. The Mkondo dwarves found their first city on Zea, Lovecane, while Vardorvis sets up camp near today's Stranglewood, along with some Venators he brought, who are elite Zarosian archers and scouts. You might be familiar with their physics-bending bows. While scouting around, a Venator finds a strange plant which he brings back to camp to show it to his mates. It beats me why he thought finding a new plant on a new continent was that noteworthy, and when he comes back to camp, Vardorvis is just as thoroughly unimpressed by the local vegetation. However, the plant somehow gives him an unknown infection of some kind, but it doesn't seem to affect his health in any way, so he shrugs it off and returns his focus to silencing his screaming ego. His scouts locate the dwarven settlement and he starts planning an attack, but his enemies discover his own camp because a scout was followed while he returned there. So Lovecane and his boys launch a preemptive attack that takes the Zarosians completely by surprise with their pants several inches below their knees. The Venators all get killed and Vardorvis is captured and executed, which usually wouldn't be a problem because he's a vampire, and vampires are completely resistant to most non-silver weaponry. However, the whole plant infection subplot returns with a vengeance. It turns out it was more like a parasite that suppressed his natural resistances, and so the dwarves have no issues beheading him before they return to their new home. But after they leave, Vardorvis's body rises again through the parasitic possession, and it slowly spreads around the area until it becomes the Stranglewood we all love so much. That's also why Vardorvis is headless but still a menace. Especially his awakened version, holy cow, that fight is ridiculous. He still has his medallion on him though, which means the Fantastic Four are now the Fantastic One, as only Duke Sukilis is left standing. He actually gets to survive for much longer than his peers, although it's unknown what he was up to during most of the early Third Age. Probably just busy channeling his inner Crusader King, since you'll recall he was now acting commander of the Zarosian forces, which is not a very pleasant job at this point in time. Eventually he goes to the secret fortress of Gorok, which was built in a remote northern corner of 4-3 province. The enemy factions don't know it even exists, so that's a good place to run what's left of the empire without fearing an assault or siege. The fortress has amassed a small civilian population though, as two loyalists Majorat, Mizark and Jalan, led a group of refugees here to keep them safe. This calls for very strict rules to ensure that the place remains secret, and so nobody is allowed outside of the underground passages, like ever, for several generations. During that time, Duke Sukilis becomes a little delusional. The Empire is losing more and more ground while their enemies are becoming ever stronger, but somehow he still has grand ideas of reconquering the world from this weakened state. As with every mentally unstable expansionist dictator facing inevitable defeat, he starts summoning people to his quarters and straight up eating them to steal their power or life force or something. But it's kinda hard to keep that kind of stuff going on for too long without rumors starting to spread, and spread they do to the point where Jalan and Mizark, the Majorat duo who brought the OG refugees here, decide to Ctrl-Z their decision and scramble to organize a quick evacuation of the fortress. In a matter of hours, almost everyone is gone. They've escaped from the Duke, who's now a huge grotesque mass thanks to all the people he snacked on. But good for the remaining civilians, they've made it out. Except they're a bunch of people who have never been outside before, suddenly left to fend for themselves in the very far north of the continent, with most of their empire controlled by enemies at that point. So I still don't think it ends very well for them. After the evacuation, the Majorats seal off the prison section of the fortress, where Sukilis had relocated his quarters. Jalan stays behind and encasts himself in ice, his reasoning being that Gorok might be near enough to the Majorat ritual site that maybe he can get the ritual benefits without actually risking sacrificing himself or being rejected by the Zamorak in Majorat. What a little coward. Also, he has a nightmare that turns him into this thing, known affectionately to us gamers as the Phantom Muspa. Sometimes I get annoyed waking up from a nightmare all sweaty, but I guess I need to check my privilege against this guy. But anyway, the Duke remains sealed away alone in the fortress underground without any innocent left to eat, pretty unfortunate for him, and he stays there for a really long time along with his medallion. And that is the fate of the Fantastic Four. But if there's one thing Duke Zucellus is known for, it's of course his handsome appearance. So why not get this fine specimen imprinted on your very clothing? Allow me this short little aside. During my Raids lore video, I promoted these incredible visual designs by a talented artist of the OSRS community as a way to thank them for helping me during the production. And since it led to many of you getting some merch from them, we've teamed up once again. Even if you're not interested in merch, check out the designs at least. They're genuinely really well done, and if you are interested in merch, you can use the code MULTI15 for 15% off while supporting a fellow OSRS adventurer. And just all-around great guy I've known for years. Just make sure to use the code. We wouldn't want for you to not get a discount, and for me to not get a little cut. Let's return to the early Third Age. Zamorak's return. Specifically, let's return 7 years after Zamorak's banishment. He returns to Gielinor bigger, badder, and stronger than before, and leading a bunch more troops. Congratulations, Gielinor, the God Wars are now properly upon you. There's a whole laundry list of other Third Age events I want to talk about, but from this point on you can assume that the background for all of it is as follows. Constant warfare, mainly in the form of a free-for-all between Saradomin, Zamorak, and the remaining Zarosian loyalists. What's left of the Empire slowly gets torn apart, Saradomin and Zamorak even sometimes forming temporary alliances of convenience just because they hate Zaros a bit more than they hate each other, so hey, they might as well. As the God Wars progresses, most of what was once the Zarosian Empire mostly becomes Zamorakian territory, and what's left of its original population gets squeezed south into the desert. This is more or less what happens in the following thousands of years, so just keep it in mind so I don't have to come back to it as we zoom into specific Third Age events of note. And thank you for your cooperation. Also, as the God Wars turn fully apocalyptic, a bunch of surface species look at the unfolding chaos and just peace out on the ground. For example, the gnomes don't even like any of these warring gods, so they peace out as deep down they're into Gothics. You might have noticed there's a bunch of big caves around gnomish settlements. It's probably because they only return to the surface in the Fourth Age. The dwarves don't even like any of these warring gods either, so they peace out as deep down they're into rocks and minerals and that kind of thing, I think. They build their great city of Keldagrim deep underneath the mountains of the Fremenic province. A lot of them also flee west across the sea and join the glorified refugee camp that is northern Zaya and Lovacane at the time. The Dorgashun don't even like their own god telling them to go kill themselves on enemy spears for his own sick war fantasies. Very entitled of them, I know. So they peace out as deep down they're into pretty much anything that isn't that. They desert and go hide in a hole, but there's an earthquake at some point and they're sealed off there for a really bloody long time, during which they slowly build their current culture and society in their iconic city of Dorgesh Khan. For their part, humans are kind of an anomaly in that their race is extremely spread out, both in terms of geography and allegiances. Many of them actually are into being told to go on the battlefield and die. Some aren't so much, but have no real say in the matter. However, others have the luxury of being able to lose everything they've ever owned to embark on a perilous journey west across the sea to settle in a new place where they have dick all, but at least aren't under threat of being annihilated by a random army every morning. Fucking 1%ers. And so Lovacane gets a couple new city friends when human refugees found Piscarilius and Archaeus. Don't worry, I haven't forgotten about the other two, they're just created later. Also, Corinth as a political entity isn't a thing yet, and the cities will not unite until at least 4,000 years. So until then, if I use the term Corinth, it's just to refer to the area of modern-day Corinth. Also, the elves stay even more isolated than before. Seren has no interest in sending them to the killing field, and they mostly retreat to Prifddinas for the entire Third Age, rarely leaving the safety of its crystal walls. Luckily for them, they're far away from the main belligerents and have the Galarpos Mountains acting as a natural bulwark against eastern invasions, so they are left alone for the most part. Also, one of their clans built the Gauntlet as a way to train the elves' fighting and survival abilities, because should they get pulled into the wider God Wars, they're definitely gonna need it. The Fall of Hallowvale. With the general premise of the God Wars established, it's time to have a look at its next major event, the invasion of Hallowvale. Some backstory first. Vampires come from their homeland of Vampirium. They used to live a tribal existence until Zaros dropped by and pushed them to adopt a more civilized lifestyle. Next thing they knew, they still mostly had a tribal lifestyle, except now there were 8 houses rather than a bunch of tribes. How civilized of them. One dude, Lowerniel Vergidiad Draken, which by the way, in my God Wars lore video I pronounced it Draken instead of Drakan, and nobody felt the need to correct me for that one. Kinda sus that so many people only cared about Slisky's name being butchered. I bet that snake has spies all over the internet. Anyway, this Draken feller sees the chaos resulting from this restructuring of the vampiric society, and he uses the occasion to unite his own house of Draken and conquer the other 7 houses, thus becoming the vampiric top dog. Eventually, the vampires follow Zaros to Gielinor, but Lowerniel later becomes part of the Backstab Amigos, and since he's the godfather dictator of all the vampires, their entire race is aligned with Zamorak now. As with many of the other prominent Backstab Amigos, Lowerniel was convinced to join the conspiracy against Zaros through the various cliché promises mentioned earlier, land, power, titles, etc. But he has an advantage few of his old co-conspirators have. An entire species of creatures born violent killers, with a list of immunities longer than that of the Cape slot table on the wiki. Instead of twiddling his thumbs until Zamorak rewards his good boy behavior, he decides to go kick some ass himself, and surprises basically the whole world by invading one of the most powerful realms on the continent, the Kingdom of Hallowvale. Vampires begin pouring into Efarite Hallow's domain and taking territory. However, one of their few weaknesses is light magic, and guess what the Icians inhabiting these lands have an affinity for? Lowerniel is not the kind of guy to be bothered by trifling matters such as catastrophic amounts of casualties though, so the vampires press on ever deeper. Long story short, the blood-addicted Zamorakians make it all the way to the southwestern corner of the kingdom, where they besiege the last corner of unoccupied Hallowvale, its capital city. But a lot of vampires have died, as in a buttload of them. They're blockading the city, sure, but even the most inexperienced Crusader Kings 2 player can tell you they ain't storming that shit with the troops they're left with. But then, enter stage left 2 of Lowerniel's most prominent allies, Vazek Vita, head of the Vitter Vampiric House, and Ranis Draken, brother to Lowerniel. Together, they capture a Justiciar, i.e. an elite Saradominist knight if you forgot. They do some nasty stuff to him, which for monetization purposes I will not be describing, and eventually he breaks, telling them about a secret passage connecting the outside world to the Queen's castle. The 2 scheming vampire nobles send a small infiltration force through this passage, which I hope is not the same as the one found here, because that's a very half-assed secret passage if so. The mission goes as planned, and Queen Efarite's human husband, King Acertes, is abducted and brought outside of the city. The next day, Queen Efarite tells her court that they've had a good ride, but she loves her daddy, so it's time to surrender. Not exactly entering negotiations from a position of strength, she makes about the only offer she can, offering the kingdom's surrender in exchange for the king's life. Lowerniel says sure, then as soon as he's taken control of the entire kingdom, he goes psych and proceeds to speedrun the Guinness World Record for most crimes against humanity, and also Icianity. He enslaves Hallowvale's humans to basically use them as roaming blood bags, because blood is to vampires what coffee is to my 5 in the morning self. He also turns many of them into vampires since they lost so many of their own during the invasion. King Acertes himself is among the ones to be transformed, and once he's fully done with the vampirification process, he adopts the name Vanstrom Klaus and attempts to kill his 2 children. He manages to kill the former princess, RIP unnamed lady, but his son Safalin barely survives, although the attack leaves him amnesiac. Much later, Safalin will go on to found and lead the Mayarchy, aka the Mauritanian Resistance, ironically having no memory of one of his nemesis being his own father. Overall, there's not a lot of heartwarming stories on this side of the Salve River. Also, Queen Efarite is killed and buried in the Ician graveyard. Except it's revealed during the Mayarchy quest series that she wasn't really, so we'll probably find out what happened to her when the Blood Moon Rises comes out. But for now, her status and whereabouts are a big question mark officially. Hallowvale becomes Mauritania, and Lowerniel Drakan becomes Lord Lowerniel Drakan. La-di-da. He goes to Vazek and tells her, cheers mate, as a reward, here's a whole ass castle, with a glaring vulnerability that thousands of years later you still haven't fixed for some reason. Also, while the invasion was ongoing, a small force of Bandosians sneak into Hallowvale while both sides are distracted and head to the Slayer Tower. Bandos has heard that the place is full of beautifully sculpted gargoyles, and he's come up with a clever magical ritual to animate them and turn them into his newest minions. It goes wrong, obviously, and its failure is why there's a bunch of stone gargoyles somehow roaming the Slayer Tower to this day, including the grotesque guardians. After the invasion, Saradominists are horrified that Hallowvale has fallen to the Zamorakians. One day, a mysterious hooded man visits 6 human brothers and offers them the classic unlimited power in exchange for very vague and will definitely make you regret saying yes later kind of promises. So naturally the brothers agree, or you know I wouldn't be talking about them right now. They become the Barrows Bros and assemble a big army for a Saradominist crusade into Mauritania. The Crusaders Uno reverse card the invasion, but of course the mysterious stranger comes back to remind the brothers of the aforementioned vague promises, and they suddenly start being a little sloppy in battle. The Saradominists make it all the way to the southeast, but an unexpected night ambush leaves all 6 brothers dead by the next day. The survivors reconsider their situation before burying the brothers into their iconic tombs and legging it. In a twist that will shock nobody at all, the mysterious man was of course not some random village elder, but good old Slisky. He casts a spell whose magic seeps into the ground and reanimates the brothers as phantoms, which he can presumably raise to help in battle at some point. Maybe he's forgotten though, because by the 5th age they're all still napping in there. Skotizo and Zalcano. You know when you switch to Ancients and suddenly you can't tell which teleport location is which thanks to their weird-ass names? Well, pretty much all of these places are the names of Zarosian cities or fortresses that got wiped out during the Zarosian extermination perpetrated by Zamorak and Saradomin. WTF is Karil, an old fortress in today's Canifis. Lassar, we've talked about it at length already. Anakarl, an old 4-3 city whose only remnants are the demonic ruins. Karalengar, another Zarosian city leveled by the later parts of the Third Age, except this one has a little bit more of a story behind it. One of the more unremarkable Zamorakian generals distinguished himself during Karalengar's destruction, and even Zamorak himself noticed his leadership and cunning during the battle. That general was the demon Skotizo, who was personally handpicked by his Majorat overlord for his next assignment. You see, rumors had reached Zamorak of yet another potent plot device, so he orders Skotizo to take a small force to the uncharted Karazi jungle and bring it back. His group managed to spot the entrance to the ancient temple after a few days of whacking dense vegetation, then handily solve its maze thanks to the shortest path plugin, and finally find the artifact at its center. However, while Skotizo had demonstrated his leadership and cunning, he had yet to put the same effort into his loyalty. He claims the artifact for himself and murders his own man, then scarpers west as far away as possible from the tantrum Zamorak would inevitably throw. Which he did. He was royally pissed, and like the good and fair leader that he is, he asserted that Skotizo's sister Zalcano, another demon general, was guilty by association. That's some proper DPRK shit right there. Everyone somehow knew Skotizo had fled west, so Zamorak told Zalcano to bring back his precious artifact he has no claim to, or there would be consequences. He put a curse on her that would slowly turn her to stone and could only be lifted by the completion of her mission. Zalcano had to speedrun Plague City and Biohazard, then complete underground pass with shitty agility, which can't have been pleasant, but after a rough day of questing, she was finally in Tiranon looking for her brother. Except if you know anything at all about Skotizo, it's not much of a spoiler to tell you that she never found him there. It didn't take too long for elf scouts to notice a giant demon roaming their pristine forests. Zalcano doesn't exactly blend well with the local landscape, and they were like, oh shit, oh fuck, the God Wars have finally come to our doorstep. But they finally calm down when it becomes clear that Zalcano was just solo dolo, which just raised even more questions for them. They ended up converting a cave under Priftinus into a big magically sealed prison, captured their uninvited demonic guest, and locked her in there. They were a little weirded out by her stone-flavored leprosy, but eventually they figured out it was a curse, which ended up accelerating, perhaps due to Zamorak already knowing that she had failed in her mission. If you're ever annoyed at your siblings, remember that at least you never ended up encased in a prison of stone within a prison of stone because of them. And speaking of siblings, this whole time Skotizo was hiding not in Tiranon, but even further west on Zaya, where he dug himself a nice cozy hole underground and used his looted artifact to attract a bunch of various monsters to his lair. In theory, this was probably meant as a defensive measure in case Zamorak found him out and attacked, but in practice, it ended up being mainly a convenient multi-combat area for sweaty adventurers to grind Slayer in. Also, it's possible Skotizo has no idea to this day that Zamorak was banished from Gillinor thousands of years ago, and that the God Wars have long been over, considering he's still hiding deep underground like a demonic naked mole rat. The Desert Campaign. Attention all passengers, we are now entering the late Third Age. At this point, the few remaining Zarosian loyalists are hiding in the Kharidian desert. By far their greatest remaining asset is a Majorat called Azanadra, whom Zaros had handpicked as both a general and Pontifex Maximus, meaning Chief High Priest. He's extremely powerful even by Majorat standards, enough for both Saradomin and Zamorak to loop the panic emote just thinking about attacking him. Instead, they go back to Saradomin's tried and tested method of magically imprisoning OP enemies, since that worked so well for Nex, massive casualties notwithstanding. They form their 10,000th temporary alliance of convenience and corner Azanadra before sealing him inside the Yaldraucht Pyramid, which from now on I'll simply be calling the Ancient Pyramid, thank you. Now there is nothing left in the desert to truly pose a threat to the Saradominists and Zamorakians, so they launch a desert campaign and basically fuck shit up wherever shit is encountered. User gets the God Wars treatment, although Zamorak's general Thamaron gets severely beaten up during the attack, so he retreats to Imperius, the homeland of the demons, where he dies of his injury in his own throne room. What a loser. Ulek also gets mostly yeeted out of existence by the rampaging armies. None of those last two places had anything to do with Zaros, by the way. Zamorak's armies just decide to trash the place for funs and giggles. They do so under the command of a black demon called Balfrog Kriath, by the way, who will go on to outlast the God Wars and become one of Krill Tsutsaroth's bodyguards in the God Wars dungeon. The more you know. They stop short of wiping out Menaphos and Sophanum though, so maybe by the time they reach them, they finally realize that they're long done with their goal of wiping out the Zarosians. The devastating finale. There's a lot more stuff going on during the Third Age that I could talk about, but much of it relates to things we're gonna get into later, so let's keep it more convenient for me and pull up our time machine to go back when we need the context for something. This section is already way longer than I was hoping for, which to be fair is more the rule than the exception whenever I'm writing anything at all, but still. Fast forward to near the end of the 4,000-year-long God Wars. There's next to no trace of Zaros left. In fact, who's even Zaros? Never heard of that guy. Most of the mainland is a battlefield between the two remaining great powers, Saradomin and Zamorak, except one of them is clearly greater than the other. At this point, everyone agrees that it's likely just a matter of time before Zamorak emerges victorious in the God Wars. His power is growing, his armies are dummy strong, and his symbol looks a little like pelvis bones. The latter has nothing to do with anything, but I only just noticed, so I thought I'd share that. So behind closed doors, Saradomin is like, I don't want to lose to this evil loser. Armadil is like, I don't want Saradomin to lose to this evil loser, or I'm probably next to lose to this evil loser. And Bandos is like, I don't want anyone to lose to anyone else because I fucking love war and I don't want it to stop. A 20 millionth alliance of convenience is formed, except this time it's not a duo against Zaros, but a trio against Zamorak. Remember, gods are obsessed with artifacts of power, so the alliance secretly arranges the creation of a top-tier weapon, the God Sword, hoping they can AGS spec Zamorak back to Lumbridge. That's Section A of their plan. Section B is a daring attack on Foreign 3 Province, at this point Zamorak's main stronghold. They hope the whole thing goes as follows. A huge combined allied army launches a surprise attack aiming straight for Zamorak himself. Some Armadillian aviancies will fly the ace up their sleeve to the battlefield, and a tick-perfect Godsword Gmol combo will secure their success. But what do we know about plans, kids? That's right, they never survive contact with the enemy. Correct. It seemed Zamorak had prior knowledge of at least part of the plan, because while his armies do seem unprepared for the big push into 4 and 3, he likely was aware of the Godsword's existence and the route through which the Aviancies were going to bring it to the Allied army, as the delivery groups gets ambushed by demons in the mountains west of 4 and 3. They know they can't let the Godsword fall into Zamorakian hands, so they hastily call for reinforcements and look for a defensible position they can use to hunker down until the cavalry arrives. When the Allied armies learn of this development, they start sweating profusely, and each sends a detachment west led by some of their strongest warriors. This, of course, includes Commander Ziliana for Saradomin, Kriara for Armadil, and General Grardor for Bandos. I assume Zamorak also sends more troops their way, because there's a lot of Zamorakian minions in the God Wars dungeon that wouldn't exactly pull their weight in an ambush against enemies they know will be flying. But why do I even bring up the God Wars dungeon, you ask? Actually, you don't ask that, because you're smart enough to know where this is going, you clever cookie. The Aviancies protecting the Godsword, of course, end up in a huge cave with a big temple, aka the Temple of Lost Ancients, aka the place with the ancient prison where Nex was imprisoned over 5,500 words ago, aka the God Wars dungeon. This cave must be going through a big identity crisis with all these different names associated with it. The Aviancies' reinforcements arrive in the nick of time, Hollywood style, and turn the tide of the battle. Except, as we know, this alliance was from the start one of pure convenience, and none of its three parties actually trust their allies, so they start fighting each other, probably over some dumb argument like which one of their gods' symbol makes for the coolest hilt. During this symbol measuring contest, the Godsword gets shattered into pieces and the fighting devolves into a free-for-all that will be familiar to everyone who's ventured in this cave before. The protracted killing leads to a handful of Saradomin priests fighting inside the Temple of Lost Ancients, becoming disillusioned with the whole God Wars thing, which, if anything, it's surprising it took 4,000 years of war for that to happen. One of their fellow priests notices their growing doubts and comes out of the closet, admitting he himself has been sick of this shit for a while now and has since converted to the teachings of Gothics. He teaches his fellows about how great Mr. Green Wonky Teardrop is, and their clique secretly begins switching its allegiance to the god of oversleeping. Their new leader, i.e. the bloke who told them about Gothics in the first place, says he once found a ritual to awaken Gothics himself, but he was not powerful enough to perform it on his own. However, now that they have a whole Gothics fan club, he thinks they can use the power of friendship to pull it off. They get ready for the ritual, which, knowing Gothics, probably involves candles and tea and stone circles. They finally pull the trigger, and what do you know, the Mad Lads have done it. They've awakened one of the most powerful entities to ever grace Gielinor with its presence. Except that's not Gothics. The ritual thaws out the ancient prison and unseals it, freeing a very angry Nex and Zarosian army. Yep, who would have thought? Turns out this fishy Saradomin priest turned Gothixian was actually Slisky, manipulating his enemies to unfreeze his homies. That trick never gets old. The former priests don't live long enough to regret straying from the light of Saradomin, and Nex steps out of the ancient prison and comes face to face with the most confusing scene in Gielinor's history. But she shrugs it off and decides to add a fifth player to the free-for-all. What happens next is almost comical. This whole mess happened because an alliance of convenience broke down, so the original 4 players decide to rectify this new pickle they find themselves in by entering into an alliance of convenience. As you can see, none of those guys had the foresight to bring breathing protection, so I bet half of them died to Nexus coughing attack alone. But the shiny new alliance does manage to push the purple squad back into the ancient prison, although they don't manage to freeze it like it was before, and instead apply the equivalent of a band-aid by slapping a seal on this door, and just hoping the enemies stay behind it. Mission accomplished, Nex is subdued once again, and you better believe that the next step is to throw the alliance out the window and resume the infighting. Back on the surface though, the Alliance is still holding this whole time, and their combined army is managing just fine without their secret weapon, so much for that. They continue their mad push towards Zamorak's position until he's cornered and kinda buggered. But instead of coming out of hiding brandishing a white flag like some kind of filthy Saradominist scum, he picks the second most reasonable option and goes boom. He channels the power of the Stone of Jas, which I thought was supposed to be in Darkmeyer, but whatever, maybe he had it moved, and unleashes a level 17,000 fireball that wipes out Gilinor's most prosperous province. RIP 4 and 3. You will be missed. No, seriously, you will be, because no one likes the wilderness. I'm not sure how many die in the following conflagration, but I can guarantee we'll need more than just you and I to count them on fingers. The entire combined allied army and probably a decent chunk of Zamorak's own army gets annihilated before anyone can say nothing like a nice cup of tea. All that's left behind is a region that will forever after give constant headaches to those doing Clue Scrolls and Mage Arena 2. Something crazy and severely overdue happens due to this, though. Guthix is awakened by the sound of several ICBMs worth of nuclear payloads outside. You know when you set out to have a nice, refreshing 25 minutes nap, but when you come to it's dark outside, both your lower eyelids feel like you have Anna in a barrel attached to them, and you're not so sure which decade it is anymore? Imagine that level of grogginess, except your nap lasted about 6,000 years, and in your sleep your neighbors have turned your beautiful garden into an open-air latrine. That is the state Guthix finds himself in when he steps outside into the super cool world he discovered and lovingly shaped over thousands of years, only to find it looking like this, and this. He gets hit by anger issues the likes of which no therapy in existence could contain, and tells all of these young punks to get off his lawn. By which I mean he banishes all other gods from Gilinor and imposes the Edicts of Guthix, which is a fancier way of saying that he threatens to completely annihilate the world if the other gods pull any kind of bullshit ever again. Saren approaches him with a warm smile and tells him thanks for saving the world, these guys royally fucked things up, but finally we can return to our peaceful world building like the good old days. Guthix though is having none of it and is aggressively pointing towards the exit. Elf curse or no elf curse, y'all mother-flipping gods are leaving Gilinor, he says. This puts Saren in the uncomfortable position of choosing between her own life or the species to which she dedicated her whole life. In the end, she tragically yeets herself, shattering her own body into tiny crystals so that her body can remain on Gilinor and sustain the elves' lives, even after death. Rest in peace, Saren. I, for one, deeply appreciate your sacrifice, as someone who's used the leftovers of it to get my infernal cape. Which I definitely did solely as an homage to dear Saren, and not because I couldn't afford a twisted bow. Finally, all the other gods are gone from this world, planet, dimension, plane of existence thing, so Guthix goes and finds a cave to start weeping in now that there's nobody left around to call him a crybaby. If rocks are renowned for one thing, it's their empathy, and so naturally the cave walls get overwhelmed by Guthix's raw display of emotions and start crying too. The cave will keep on weeping for the foreseeable future and become sacred to the followers of Guthix. He promotes a weird snake lady to the position of guardian of his tears and tasks her with only allowing the worthy to drink from them. Which might sound a little bit weird, but there's plenty of real-life religious rituals that are way more fucked up when you think about it, so I'm willing to cut Juna some slack. She's good people. After crying for a while longer, Guthix returns to his bed and goes back to sleep. Congratulations, Gilinor, you've made it through your ugliest chapter. Oh, also the God Wars dungeon gets frozen. And also, towards their end, a female Majorat called Palkira, who later dies, gives birth to General Khazard, who is still today the youngest Majorat and possibly the only one born on Gilinor. That's completely unrelated, but I thought it was an interesting fact, so I'm slipping it in here. But with that comes the end of this part 1. Sorry I'm splitting it up, but my script got just a little bit out of hand and I decided this video needed an intervention. I need to warn you that things are gonna slow down in the coming weeks on this channel because we are moving very far away. But fear not, once that's done, I will be back. Just don't get too attached to this rather fantastic background, cause you'll never see it again. But anyway, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this new style. It was a real treat for me to make this video after basically burning out on getting all the HD footage for the other ones. You all know the drill, like, subscribe, and most importantly, let me know your thoughts in the comments. And stay tuned for part 2. If you want to get my videos 3 days early, regular updates on ongoing projects, and support my work, do like these handsome devils on the screen and become a channel member. And take care. I'll see you next time.